Chapter 21 Burning Socio-Economic Issues. Indian planners pursued growth as an end in itself, ignoring poverty reduction and other social objectives. 1. Economic impact of the COVID-19. Introduction. Global economy is hit with the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. In absence of either a vaccine or medicine, the human feeling is unbelievably horrifying, causing unprecedented economic, social and psychological trauma. Experts world over are busy predicting the possible economic impact of it on national and global economies, finding it really hard to assess the present and the future course of economic impact. Assessing the gravity. Across the world, the machines have stopped, streets have gone empty, and offices are shut. The deadly virus has brought the world to a grinding halt on a scale that has no historical precedent. World had seen the disruptions brought by the world wars, but even then, machines were humming barring the war zones. But the post-corona times will be unique in nature to understand and move on. The gravity of matter about the possible impact of the novel virus on the world may be imagined by the three recent statements which came from the UN institutions. 1. On 27 March 2020, the IMF chief, Kristalina Georgieva said, "Global economy is now in a recession. Thanks to COVID-19, and it will be worse than the one witnessed in 2009 following the global financial crisis. We should not go with small measures now, when we know that it is a gigantic crisis. We have never seen the world economy standing still. The length and depth of this recession depend on two things: containing the virus and having an effective, coordinated response to the crisis." 2. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on 1 April 2020 warned that the world faces the most challenging crisis since World War II, confronting a pandemic threatening people in every country, one that will bring a recession that probably has no parallel in the recent past. There is also a risk that the combination of the disease and its economic impact will contribute to enhanced instability, enhanced unrest, and enhanced conflict, he further added. Even after more than 3 months, by early April 2020, when the novel virus hit the world, it was difficult enough to assess its global economic impact. However, some early reports gave some idea about it. Views of the first to such reports are being summarized below. 1. UNCTAD Special Report. The UN Trade and Development Body, the UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, released a special report on the possible impact of the novel coronavirus on the world economy on 30 March 2020. Titled as the COVID-19 Shock to Developing Countries, Towards a Whatever It Takes program for the two-thirds of the world's population being left behind, the major part of its analysis is summarized below. World economy will go into recession, India and China being the likely exceptions. However, the developing economies will be impacted heavily. The report did not give a detailed explanation as to why and how. India and China will be the exceptions as the world faces a recession and loss in global income that will impact developing countries also. Developing countries will face a financing gap of $2.5 trillion for them. The commodity-rich exporting countries will face a $2 trillion to $3 trillion drop in investments from overseas in the next 2 years. The speed at which the economic shockwaves from the pandemic has hit developing countries is dramatic, even in comparison to the 2008 global financial crisis. The economic fallout from the shock is ongoing and increasingly difficult to predict, but there are clear indications that things will get much worse for developing economies before they get better. In 2 months since the virus began spreading beyond China, developing countries have taken an enormous hit in terms of capital outflows, growing bond spreads, currency depreciations, and lost export earnings, including from falling commodity prices and declining tourist revenues. Lacking the monetary, fiscal and administrative capacity to respond to this crisis, the consequences of a combined health pandemic and a global recession will be catastrophic for many developing countries and halt their progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Even as advanced economies are discovering the challenges of dealing with a growing informal workforce, this remains the norm for developing countries, amplifying their difficulties in responding to the crisis. In recent days, advanced economies and China have put together massive government packages which, according to the G20 leading economies, will extend a $1 trillion to $2 trillion injection of demand into the major G20 economies and a 2 percentage point turnaround in global output. In the face of a looming financial tsunami this year, the report proposes a four-pronged strategy that could begin to translate expressions of international solidarity into concrete action. 1. First, a $1 trillion liquidity injection, a kind of helicopter money drop for those being left behind through reallocating existing special drawing rights, SDRs, at the IMF and adding a new allocation that will need to go considerably beyond the 2009 allocation made in response to the global financial crisis. 2. Second, a debt jubilee for distressed economies. An immediate debt standstill on sovereign debt payments should be followed by significant debt relief. A benchmark could be the German debt relief administered after World War II, which cancelled half of its outstanding debt. On that measure, around $1 trillion should be cancelled this year, overseen by an independently created body. 3. Third, a Marshall Plan. For a health recovery funded from some of the missing official development assistance, ODA, long promised but not delivered by development partners. An additional $500 billion, a quarter of the last decade's missing ODA, largely in the form of grants, should be earmarked for emergency health services and related social relief programs. 4. Finally, capital controls should be given their legitimate place in any policy regime to curtail the surge in capital outflows, to reduce illiquidity driven by sell-offs in developing country markets, and to arrest declines in currency and asset prices. The proposed package is similar in size to the amount that would have been delivered to developing countries over the last decade if countries in the Development Assistance Committee of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, had met their 0.7% ODA target. 2. Economist Intelligence Unit Report. As per the exclusive report of the world-renowned Economist Intelligence Unit, released on 30th March 2020, South Asia will be deeply impacted by the pandemic. The pandemic caused by the novel virus is expected to dampen economic growth substantially in the South Asian region, including India. Preventive steps taken by the governments will limit movement of people and lead to demand-side shock, while closure of factories and businesses will lead to a supply-side shock. The stimulus provided by the central banks and governments will not come close to offsetting the loss of economic activity. A. Dense living conditions. B. Low hygiene awareness. And C. Overburdened healthcare systems. South Asia faced to healthcare challenges. A. Chronic underinvestment in healthcare infrastructure. B. Low number of doctors and hospital beds. Conclusion. While the governments of the world were busy in fulfilling the present needs of their citizens, they were conscious enough about the future needs also, activating stimulus and relief packages. Meanwhile, the latest UN World Happiness Report 2020, though it could not include the data of coronavirus impact, its editors have good news for the world. As per them, the level of happiness will increase during these tough times. By now, the community response across the world has been very positive and full of compassion, donations flowing in from corporates, non-government organizations, and individuals at large. This time of global crisis will also get over, but it needs high precaution, courage, and compassionate response from one and all. All. 2. Exploring a new economic model. Introduction. World has been using the resources of Earth in myriads of ways. The dimension and speed of resource use accelerated like anything led by industrial revolution, technologies, and the rising population. Once the economic institutions of the UN came into being, we find similar methods and processes of resource use getting institutionalized at the global scale, globalization giving it new wings by early 1990s. Soon, experts started warning about the rampant resource depletion, rising environmental pollution, and the dangers of climate change. Alternative economic model. Doubting the sustainability of the present economic model, experts have suggested several alternatives since 1960s itself, some of which have got acceptance also while most of others could get only academic attention. As world got hit by the novel coronavirus, the debate has again started making news, as world has the only clue by now that the virus got spread from the consumption of the wild animals farmed in China. In the wake of acute famine, in early 1970s the country had allowed farming of the wild animals for human consumption, the vicious cycle of resource scarcity. In recent years, the idea of circular economy, which is originally based on the steady-state economy, has found some acceptance in the world. Steady-state economy. The steady-state economy has its roots in the ecological economics. In late 1960s, Kenneth Boulding suggested the world to adopt an ecological economic model for growth and development. Boulding believed that human economic and other behaviors are all embedded in a larger interconnected system. His most influential work is the brilliant essay The Economics of the Coming Spaceship Earth, 1966, in which he describes two types of economies, the cowboy and the spaceman economies. 1. The cowboy economy is characterized by the notion of limitless resources and space or land, so that if we exhaust one place, we can just find another one and keep exploring. In this view, consumption and production are always good, the more the best, and success is measured by the volumes of factors of production being used. This economy was dominant among industrialized nations at the time, and it is still present in many of our current institutions. Boulding disagreed with this view. Rather, he emphasized that we have one planet to share with all living beings, and all we do depend on what this planet can provide and support. Boulding presents his main argument based on thermodynamics principles and discusses closed and open systems regarding matter, energy, and knowledge. He argues that the Earth of the future is more similar to a closed system than the need to consider limits for both inputs and outputs in production or consumption processes. He also presents some interesting reflections about behavior, society, and well-being, including intergeneration issues. As per it, the welfare of the individual depends on the extent to which he can identify himself with others, and that the most satisfactory individual identity is that which identifies not only with a community in space, but also with a community extending over time from the past into the future. This community includes all forms of life, all species that share the planet's heritage and future, and it is urgent we live in harmony within this complex and marvelous spaceship Earth, he concludes. Concludes. Ecological economists do not want to fiddle at the margins of economics, but to revolutionize its aims and assumptions. To its practitioners, ecological economics is neither ecology nor economics, but a fusion of both. Their starting point is to recognize that the human economy is part of the natural world. Our environment, they note, is both a source of resources and a sink for wastes. But it is ignored in conventional textbooks, where neat diagrams trace the flows between firms, households, and the government as though nature did not exist, a mistaken view as per the ecological economists. The natural capital of the earth provides important services, from water supply to pollination. In a landmark paper from 1997, researchers valued the annual supply of such ecosystem services at $33 trillion or 1.8 times global GDP at the time. Ecological economists point out that there are two ways our economies can grow. Firstly, through technological changes, and secondly, through more intensive use of resources. As per them, only the former is worth having. They are suspicious of GDP, a crude measure which does not take account of resource depletion, unpaid work, and countless other factors. In its place, they advocate more holistic approaches, such as the Genuine Progress Indicator, GPI, a composite index that includes things like the cost of pollution, deforestation, and car accidents. While GDP has kept growing, global GPI per person peaked in 1978. By destroying our environment, we are making ourselves poorer, not richer. The solution, says Herman Daly, a former World Bank economist, is a steady-state economy where the use of materials and energy is held constant. Circular economy. As the concept of circular economy is applied by a diverse group of researchers and professionals, emphasizing different aspects of it, it has got several definitions. This makes it difficult to measure also. But most of its definitions focus on the use of raw materials or system change. Definitions that focus on resource use often follow the 3-R approach: reduce, minimum use of raw materials; reuse, maximum reuse of products and components; and recycle, high-quality reuse of raw materials. A circular economy tries to follow the example of an ecosystem. In it, there is nothing like waste because every residual item can be used to make a new product. But after eliminating the toxic substances, such as producers taking back their products after use and repairing them for a new useful life. Thus, only recycling is not important in this system, rather assuring quality is also taken care of. The idea is opposite to the linear or growth economy. While the origins of the circular economy concept are to be found in 1960s environmentalism, it evolved under the influence of ecology and cybernetics, which shaped the public environmental discourse of the period. The economy draws attention to the background of the present linear economy in post-war policies that encouraged reconstruction and a social and economic democratization across the West, including an expansion of mass consumption. It emphasizes the role of the 1960s counterculture in generating a popular reaction against this expansionary growth-based agenda, and its influence in shaping subsequent environmentalism, including the metabolic and ecological economic understanding of the environmental crisis that informs the concept of the circular economy. Case of India. It was for the first time that one official body in India, the Niti Aayog, proposed, mid-2019, the idea to adopt the circular economy. As per it, the economy has the potential to generate 1.4 crore jobs in next 5 to 7 years and create lakhs of new entrepreneurs. Speaking at an event organized by industry body FICCI, the CEO of the Aayog, Amitabh Kant, said that sustainable development and resource circularity is the need of the hour to implement circular economy. Circular economy implies reusing waste back into the production cycle to produce new products and uses instead of wasting such materials with embedded resources, Kant further added. He said that by 2050, world population would reach 9.7 billion, of which 3 billion people would prosper to middle-class consumption level. This would require 71% more resources per capita, thereby raising total mineral and material demand from 50 billion tons in 2014 to 130 billion tons in 2050, he noted. He also stressed on the need of promoting non-government organizations to spread awareness and developing circular economy as a national agenda. Resource efficiency is closely linked to the concept of circular economy, which has gained prominence as a policy goal for sustainable development in recent years. Conclusion. The mainstream economists, however, look unimpressed. They say that the GPI is a subjective measure. The idea that there is a natural limit to growth has had a bad press since the days of Thomas Malthus, a gloomy 18th century cleric who predicted, wrongly, that overpopulation would lead to famine, while the warnings about the limits to growth in the 1970s by the Club of Rome, a think tank, proved equally misguided. Human ingenuity finds solutions to some of the most vexing problems. But ecological economists warn against complacency. In 2009, a paper in Nature, a scientific journal, argued that human activity is already overstepping safe planetary boundaries on issues such as biodiversity and climate change. That suggests that ecological economists are at least asking some important questions, even if their answers turn out to be wrong. It may not be a bad thing if economics became a little sensitive to the questions they are posing. 3. From Green Revolution to Green Methods. Introduction. Newly independent India was faced with multiple challenges. However, arranging enough food for its population was the foremost. By managing with foreign aids and imports for the first few decades, India launched the popular Green Revolution in mid-1960s. The new agricultural strategy gave tremendous success, catapulting it into a self-sufficient country in food by late 1990s. Today, India is among the leading producer and exporter of many agricultural products in the world. But this success had a hidden cost, also which future India was to pay. The issues and remedies. The new technique of farming was based on certain inputs and government supports such as chemical fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, weedicides, controlled irrigation, support prices, easier loans, etc., focus being on enhancing productivity of food grains. Over the time, increased use of agricultural inputs created many challenges for the country such as depletion in water table, loss of soil fertility, increased toxic level in food chain, unsustainable cropping pattern, rising fertilizer and food subsidies, etc., resulting into an unsustainable agricultural system. It means the method of the Green Revolution was not sustainable, and it needs to be changed through suitable interventions. Environmental scientists have been warning the governments about this issue since the early 1990s itself. Though, officially, the idea of sustainable agriculture got accepted in 1997, it was in 2018 to 19 that we find a concrete plan being announced by the government, Economic Survey 2018 to 19, which says to shift from a green revolution-led productivity to green method-led productivity. Water devising policies to incentivize farmers to improve water use should become a national priority. Thrust should be on micro-irrigation that can improve water use efficiency. In India, as per the Asian Water Development Outlook, 2019, almost 90% of groundwater extracted is used for irrigation, and crops such as paddy and sugarcane consume more than 60% of irrigation water. There is a major concern whether the present practice of groundwater use can be sustained as the depth of groundwater level continues to drop. Access to markets and adopting appropriate technology. The costs of fertilizers are key determinants of profitability of farming. The fertilizer consumption, which was continually increasing since 2002. Fertilizer response ratio, FRR, has been declining over time, indicating declining responsiveness of soil fertility to fertilizer application. In this regard, India needs the following interventions: use of optimal dose based on soil health status, promotion of neem-coated urea, promotion of micronutrients, promotion of organic fertilizers, and promotion of water-soluble fertilizers. Organic and natural farming techniques, including zero-budget natural farming, ZBNF, can improve both water use efficiency and soil fertility. Conclusion. With decline in size of land holdings in agriculture, India has to focus on resource efficiency, especially in smallholder farming, to attain sustainability. A combination of resource-efficient method, dynamic cropping patterns, climate change responsive farming, and intensive use of ICT, information and telecommunication technology, should form the backbone of farming in India. For a safe and food-secured future, the agriculture sector has to undergo tremendous transformation from the philosophy of green revolution-led productivity to green method-led sustainability. To transform the rural economy, the allied sector, animal husbandry, dairying, poultry, fisheries, etc., needs to be emphasized. The performance of allied sector in terms of growth and employment has been more robust and sustainable as compared to the crop sector. 4. Bad bank. Introduction. The burden of bad debts, i.e., non-performing assets, NPAs, of banks, especially of the public sector banks, PSBs, has been increasing with every passing quarter for the last few years, caused by various reasons. As of September 2019, India's scheduled commercial banks had gross NPAs at 9.3%. Public sector banks, PSBs, had even higher NPAs, 10.6% of their total loans, crippling the biggest part of lending activities in the country, as they account for over 70% of the country's banking industry. To solve the crisis of the high NPAs, the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, had introduced multiple schemes over the last few years: flexible refinancing of infrastructure, 5x25 scheme, asset reconstruction companies, ARC, strategic debt restructuring, SDR, asset quality review, AQR, and sustainable structuring of stressed assets, S4A. But these measures have not brought much relief to the banks. As conventional remedies seem to be failing to address the menace, a bit less conventional remedy is gaining ground, which suggests the government to set up a bad bank. The concept. Theoretically, bad banks work on simple concept, i.e., banks' loans are classified into two categories, good and bad. The bad loans of the banks are bought or taken over by the bad bank, while the good loans are left with the bank itself. This way, bad loans do not contaminate the good assets of banks. As banks hit by the problem of bad loans become financially viable entities, they restart their lending process. While the concept of a bad bank is simple, the implementation can be quite complicated. A variety of organizational and financial options are there to design them. The RBI has signaled in favor of setting up such a bank, but it has also highlighted the concern of designing it properly. There are different models of creating a bad bank. India needs to go for the model which suits her needs, a bad bank which can serve two purposes. Firstly, putting away the loads of the NPAs from the balance sheet of banks, so that they can technically be fit to lend again, and secondly, infusing fresh capital into them, to make them really start lending. This model has been most used by the countries across the world, during Southeast Asian crisis, and well as in the USA, when the government of the countries did set up banks under their ownership. Such move served both of the purposes. The advice of the Economic Survey 2016-17 to set up a public sector rehabilitation agency, PARA, falls under this category. Rather, no such body had been set up by the government till April 2020. Such a proposal was there being studied. Meanwhile, two developments came in as a relief. 1. Government started infusing fresh capital into the PSBs and helping them enhance lending activities. 2. Conclusion. The WA population of India is about to plateau. Thus, the boost in economic growth is likely to peak within the next 5 years. In comparison to the East Asian economies, India's WA ratio will fall much more gradually, the reason why India may be able to avoid sharp falls in growth, as seen in case of the former. In addition, the sharp demographic differences between peninsular and hinterland India will generate wide differences in the timing of the peak, as well as opportunities to attenuate demographic imbalances via greater labor mobility. India does not need to wait longer for the time of peaking of demographic dividend, better say the opportunity is soon to recede. So that this once-in-a-century's opportunity is not missed, it is high time that requisite reforms, policies and compatible action are all put in place as soon as possible. Introduction. The non-performing assets, NPAs, of banks, particularly the public sector banks, PSBs, have been in news for being excessively high for the past several years. Several steps taken by the RBI to solve the crisis have almost failed. Meanwhile, the deterrent big private sector companies came in news with their declining earnings. These corporate entities spread across infrastructure to steel to real estate have been causing the real problem of NPAs to the banks. It means the remedy does not lie in only de-stressing the banks, but similar remedy is needed in case of the corporate sector too. The problem. Though India has today one of the fastest growth rates in the world, for the past few years, certain financial issues have been worsening. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis, GFC, of 2007, India has been trying to come to grips with the twin balance sheet, TBS, problem. 1. High NPAs of the PSBs, and 2. Highly stressed balance sheet of the private corporate sector. India has taken several steps by now to recover and control the bad loans of the banks. But they have not been very effective, and banks are even today under high stress. On the other hand, India has been waiting for a recovery in the corporate sector for their balance sheet to come in good health, but to no avail. Meanwhile, situation has been worsening over the time. The stressed corporate sector has been forced to borrow more to continue their operations, as their earnings have been deteriorating. Since the GFC, till September 2016, the debts of the top 10 stressed corporate groups have multiplied 5 times to more than 7.5 lakh rupees crore. These companies have been facing difficulty in even servicing their loans. In the meanwhile, around 12% of the total loans of the PSBs turned out to be NPAs. If some private sector estimates are to be believed, the NPAs are considerably high, around 16%. The solution: the TBS has started showing off its negative impacts on the economy. The private corporate sector has been forced to curb its investments while banks have been reducing their loan disbursals. To sustain growth, these trends need to be reversed. The only way to do so is by fixing the underlying balance sheet problems. The survey suggests considering a different approach to address the issue of TBS, setting up a centralized public sector asset rehabilitation agency, the PARA. As per it, the agency can take charge of the largest and most difficult cases and make politically tough decisions to reduce debt. So far, the official strategy has been to solve the TBS through a decentralized approach, under which banks have been put in charge of the restructuring decisions. Several such schemes have been put in place by the RBI. Most of the time, this is indeed the best strategy. But in the current circumstances, effectiveness has proved elusive as banks have simply been overwhelmed by the size of the problem. The time might have come to try a centralized approach, the PARA. A detailed discussion has been given in the New Economic Survey 2016-17. Some points are given below in support of the PARA. Concentrated debts. Stressed debts are heavily concentrated in large companies, which look as an opportunity because a relatively small number of cases need to be resolved. But large cases are inherently difficult to resolve, and that will be the challenge. Debt write-downs. Many of these companies are unviable at current levels of debt, requiring debt write-downs. It is believed that about 50% debt write-down may be needed to restore viability among them. Banks have faced difficulty to resolve NPA cases, despite RBI giving them multiple choices. Among other issues, they face severe coordination problems, since large debtors have many creditors with different interests. If PSBs think of granting large debt reductions, this could attract the attention of investigative agencies. Debt restructuring by converting debt to equity or taking over the companies and then selling them in future to a prospective buyer will be politically difficult if they sell it at loss. ARCs proving futile. The asset reconstruction companies, ARCs, haven't proved any more successful than banks in resolving bad debts and are too small to handle large cases. The ARC-bank relationship can be inherently distorted. For example, ARCs keep earning management fees for handling bad debts, even if they don't work them out. The new bankruptcy law, legislated in 2016-17, however, has started showing positive impact. It will take considerable time before it is ready to handle the large cases. Delay is costly. Since banks can't resolve the big cases, they have simply refinanced the debtors, effectively kicking the problems down the road. But this is costly for the government because it means the bad debts keep rising, increasing the cost of recapitalization for the government and the associated political difficulties. Functioning of para. Possible variants are many, though the broad outlines are simple. It would purchase specified loans, for example, those belonging to large, over-indebted infrastructure firms, from banks and then work them out, depending on professional assessments of the value-maximizing strategy. Once the loans are off the books of the PSBs, the government would recapitalize them, thereby allowing them to use their resources, financial and human, in making new loans. Similarly, once the financial viability of the over-indebted enterprises is restored, they will be able to focus on their operations rather than their finances. And they will become financially fit to borrow and go for fresh investments. Moral hazards. Such a move looks facing moral dilemma. Of course, all this will come at a price, namely accepting and paying for the losses. But this cost is inevitable. Loans have already been made, losses already incurred, and because the PSBs are the major creditors, the bulk of the burden will fall on the government, though shareholders in stressed enterprises will need to lose their equity as well. The issue for any resolution strategy, para or decentralized, is not whether the government should assume new liability. Rather, it is how to minimize a liability that has already been incurred by resolving the bad loan problem as effectively as possible. And that is precisely what the creation of para would aim to do. Capital requirements. It would require large capital, which may be managed in the following way. First, and the most important source of it would be the government, through issues of securities. Second source could be capital markets, if shares in the PSBs are sold, or private sector buy stakes in the para. Third source of capital could be the RBI. The central bank may transfer some government securities it is holding to PSBs and para. This will decrease RBI's capital. The capital of the PSBs and para would increase. It would create no implications for monetary policy since no new money would be created. Risks and difficulties. Creating the para is not without its own difficulties and risks. The country's history is not favorable to public sector endeavors. Yet, one must ask how long India should continue with the current decentralized approach, which has still not produced the desired results 8 years after the GFC, even as East Asian countries were able to resolve their much larger TBS problems within 2 years. One reason, of course, was that the East Asian countries were under much more pressure, that they were in crisis, whereas India has continued to grow rapidly. But an important reason was that it deployed a centralized strategy, which allowed debt problems to be worked out quickly using public asset rehabilitation companies. In sum, current efforts have not been successful in addressing the TBS problem. New solutions must be tried. Perhaps it is time for India to consider the para as one such solution. The approach of para could eliminate most of the obstacles currently plaguing loan resolution. It could solve the coordination problem since debts would be centralized in one agency. It could be set up with proper incentives by giving it an explicit mandate to maximize recoveries within a defined time. It would separate the loan resolution process from concerns about bank capital. By mid-2017, the government had hinted at taking some actions in this regard. However, the body is still under study. Meanwhile, The recapitalization process of the public sector banks got a big boost when the government announced, in October 2017, a sum of 2.11 lakh rupees crores for the purpose. This way, one half of the TBS crisis looks under the government's policy priority. 7. Universal Health Care. Introduction. It was the 12th plan, the first official document, which advised in favor of the universal health care, estimating a total allocation of around 2.5% of the GDP. The idea could not be implemented as the government of the time could not commit itself to the required funds, estimated to allocate maximum 1.6% of the GDP. At present, the total government expenditure, central plus states, on healthcare is 1.4% of the GDP. Economic Survey 2016-17. The healthcare-related sufferings in the country have been always a matter of high concern, out-of-pocket expenditure being one of the highest in the world, at over 70% since many decades. The idea has been a major issue of the public debate. During the last general elections, the idea kept resonating across the promises of the political parties. The challenges. Committing to the cause of universal healthcare at the practical level has been a daunting task for the government, given the scarcity of resources. To implement such a policy, the government needs to put in place a great many physical and non-physical support systems, such as number of hospitals, adequate number of personnel, medical colleges, nursing institutes, health insurance, public deliveries of vaccines and medicines, etc., naming the major ones. To implement such a policy, mobilizing the required financial resources has been the biggest challenge for the governments. Developing a financial model was the need of the hour. Going for the idea. After almost 2 years of consultations with various stakeholders, the Government of India finally took the final call in the direction of universal healthcare when the National Health Policy 2017 was announced by mid-March 2017. The policy focuses preventive and promotive health care and universal access to good quality healthcare services. The major highlights of the policy have been discussed below. Primary aim. The primary aim of the policy is to inform, clarify, strengthen and prioritize the role of the government in shaping health systems in all its dimensions, investment in health, organization and financing of healthcare services, prevention of diseases and promotion of good health through cross-sectoral action, access to technologies, developing human resources, encouraging medical pluralism, building the knowledge base required for better health, financial protection strategies and regulation and progressive assurance for health. The policy emphasizes reorienting and strengthening the public health institutions across the country to provide universal access to free drugs, diagnostics, and other essential healthcare. Approach change. The policy denotes important change from very selective to comprehensive primary healthcare package, which includes geriatric healthcare, palliative care, and rehabilitative care services. The policy advocates allocating major proportion, up to 2/3 or more, of resources to primary care followed by secondary and tertiary care. The policy aspires to provide, at the district level, most of the secondary care, which is currently provided at a medical college hospital. Broad principle. The broad principle of the policy is centered on professionalism, integrity and ethics, equity, affordability, universality, patient-centered and quality of care, accountability, and pluralism. Affordability. It seeks to ensure improved access and affordability of quality secondary and tertiary care services through a combination of public hospitals and strategic purchasing in healthcare deficit areas from accredited non-governmental healthcare providers, achieve significant reduction in out-of-pocket expenditure due to healthcare costs, reinforce trust in public healthcare system, and influence operation and growth of private healthcare industry as well as medical technologies in alignment with public health goals. Pluralistic design. To leverage the pluralistic healthcare legacy, the policy recommends mainstreaming the different health systems. Towards mainstreaming the potential of Ayush, the policy envisages better access to Ayush remedies through collocation in public facilities. Yoga would also be introduced much more widely in school and workplaces as part of promotion of good health. Focus on preemptive care. The policy affirms commitment to preemptive care, aimed at preempting the occurrence of diseases to achieve optimum levels of child and adolescent health. The policy envisages school health programs as a major focus area, as also health and hygiene being made a part of the school curriculum. Funding. The policy proposes raising public health expenditure to 2.5% of the GDP in a time-bound manner. It aims at providing larger package of assured comprehensive primary health care through the HWCs, health and wellness centers. Private participation. The idea of universal healthcare is very realistic to the time, as it has decided to enhance the participation of the private sector in a positive and proactive way in achieving the goals of the policy. It envisages private sector collaboration for strategic purchasing, capacity building, skill development programs, awareness generation, developing sustainable networks for community to strengthen mental health services, and disaster management. The policy also advocates financial and non-incentives for encouraging the private sector participation. Quantitative targets. The policy assigns specific quantitative targets aimed at reduction of disease prevalence or incidence for health status and program impact, health system performance and system strengthening. It seeks to strengthen the health surveillance system and establish registries for diseases of public health importance by 2020. It also seeks to align other policies for medical devices and equipment with public health goals. Regulatory mechanism. The policy advocates extensive deployment of digital tools for improving the efficiency and outcome of the healthcare system and proposes establishment of National Digital Health Authority (NDHA) to regulate, develop, and deploy digital health across the continuum of care. Voluntary support. The policy supports voluntary service in rural and underserved areas on pro bono, free of charge basis by recognized healthcare professionals under a Giving Back to Society initiative. Background. The Government of India adopted an elaborate procedure for formulation of the health policy. Its draft was placed in public domain on 30th December 2014. After detailed consultations with stakeholders and state governments, it was further fine-tuned. Finally, by late February 2016 it received the endorsement of the Central Council for Health and Family Welfare, the apex policy-making body. Since the last health policy was announced in 2002, the country has seen much socio-economic and epidemiological changes. Besides, there are some burning current challenges as well as emerging ones. To address these issues in holistic and effective way, the government needed to come out with a newly designed and contemporary kind of health policy. The outcome is the NHP 2017. The newly launched Ayushman Bharat scheme is a historic step in the direction of universal healthcare, covering 10 crore poor and vulnerable families, around 50 crore people, with a health coverage of 5 lakh rupees per year for secondary and tertiary medical care, including treatment of the COVID-19. Based on public-private partnership model, it is claimed to be world's biggest welfare program and aims to scale up India's expenditure on healthcare to 2.5% of the GDP, needed to make universal healthcare possible. 8. After effects of demonetization. Introduction. Early November 2016, the government announced a historic measure with profound implications for the economy. The largest denomination currency notes, 500 rupees and 1000 rupees, were demonetized. 86% of the cash in circulation thus became invalid. According to the government, this was aimed to serve 4 objectives: 1. Curbing corruption, 2. Counterfeiting of currencies, 3. Checking terrorism, as they use high denomination notes, and 4. Preventing accumulation of black money. This action followed a series of earlier efforts to curb such illicit activities, the creation of the Special Investigative Team, SIT, in 2014, the Black Money and Imposition of Tax Act 2015, Benami Transactions Act 2016, the Information Exchange Agreement with Switzerland, changes in the tax treaties with Mauritius, Cyprus and Singapore, and the Income Disclosure Scheme. This was not an unprecedented action, as there were 2 previous instances of it, in 1946 and 1978, the latter not having any significant effect on cash. There have been reports of job losses, declines in farm incomes, and social disruption, especially in the informal, cash-intensive parts of the economy. However, a systematic analysis is not possible yet due to paucity of data. The benefits of demonetization can be only felt in coming years. The move was more aimed at long-term goals than short-term. We may have a brief review about the impact of demonetization on the economy and behavioral aspects in the following way. Long-term benefits. It is too early to quantify the direction and magnitude of long-term changes. It will take several years to see the impact of demonetization on illicit transactions, on black money, and on financial savings. But there are some signs pointing to change. 1. Digitalization. One intermediate objective of demonetization is to create a less cash or cash-light economy. This will not only channelize more saving into the financial system, but it will improve tax compliance also. Currently, India is far away from this objective. The Vatal Committee has recently estimated that cash accounts for about 78% of all consumer payments. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers, 2015, India has a very high predominance of consumer transactions carried out in cash relative to other countries, accounting for 68% of total transactions by value and 98% by volume. People prefer cash transaction due to many reasons. It is convenient, accepted everywhere, its use is costless for ordinary people, though not of course for society at large, is anonymous, helps preserve privacy, which is not bad till it is not illicit or designed to evade tax. Digitalization can broadly impact the 3 sections of society: the poor, who are largely outside the digital economy; the less affluent, who are becoming part of the digital economy having acquired Jan-Dhan accounts and Rupee cards; and the affluent, who are fully digitally integrated via credit cards. 2. Real estate. This sector could have profound impact. In the past, much of the black money accumulated was ultimately used to evade taxes on property sales. A reduction in real estate prices is desirable as it will lead to affordable housing for the middle class and facilitate labor mobility across India currently impeded by high and unaffordable rents. Short-term impact. Demonetization will impose short-term costs on the economy, which remain difficult to measure by now due to lack of the right data set. As the process has created a large structural shock, the underlying behavioral parameters of the past will be imperfect indicators of future behavior and hence the outcomes. Although a framework of the short-term impact may be outlined, 1. Impact on gross domestic product, GDP, economic activities have been affected adversely. Thus, national income will get hit also, but it will be only temporary. The GDP might be lower by 0.25 to 0.5%, coming to around 7%. The implementation of GST, follow-up to demonetization, and other structural reforms should put the growth to the 8 to 10% range that India needs. 2. Redistribution of income. It will redistribute resources, also having following effects on the fiscal accounts of the government. A. RBI or government may receive some gains from the unreturned cash, wealth gains. A. Income taxes could go up as black money was deposited in bank accounts. Against this there are three negative effects. First, costs of printing new notes. Secondly, costs of sterilizing the surge in liquidity into the banking system via issuance of market stabilization scheme bonds. And thirdly, if nominal GDP growth declines, corporate and indirect tax revenues of the center could decline, but so far there is no clear evidence. Tapping the prospects. The government needs to maximize the long-term benefits and minimize short-term costs of demonetization. For this purpose, the following measures look beneficial. 1. Remonetization process should be faster. 2. Any windfall revenue arising from unreturned notes should be used for capital-type expenditures and not revenue ones. As this income will be one-off, its use should be one-off. 3. Digitalization must continue in medium term, though neither it is a panacea nor cash economy is bad. Balancing benefits and costs of both forms of payments will be sensible. The transition to digitalization must be gradual and inclusive too. Digitalization must be incentivized and the incentives favoring cash neutralized. The cost of incentivization must be borne by the public sector, government or RBI, and not the consumer or financial intermediaries. 4. Efforts to collect taxes on newly disclosed and undisclosed wealth should not lead to tax harassment by officials at all rungs of the hierarchy. A shift is needed to greater use of data, smarter evidence-based scrutiny, more reliance on online assessments with less interactions between taxpayers and tax officials. Non-punitive means should be evolved to enhance tax compliance. 5. So that demonetization indeed proves a catalyst for long-run changes in behavior, it will be required to complement demonetization with other non-punitive, incentive-compatible measures that reduce the incentives for tax evasion. Demonetization was a potentially powerful stick that now needs carrots as complements. A five-pronged strategy could be adopted. 1. GST should include activities that are sources of black money creation, land and other immovable property. 2. Individual income tax rates and real estate stamp duties could be reduced. 3. Income tax net could be widened gradually and, consistent with constitutional arrangements, progressively encompass all high incomes. 4. The timetable for reducing the corporate tax rate could be accelerated. And 5. To reduce discretion and improve accountability. Tax administration needs improvement. Conclusion. The short-term cost of demonetization is yet to be either accepted or published by the government. The interim budget 2019-20 has said it in clear terms that it has proved to be a strong move in the direction of checking black money and raising the tax compliance. 9. Addressing inequality. Introduction. Inequality has already been an important concern in India for the government. In the wake of globalization process, the debate has got even louder. Meanwhile, a few recent global reports of early 2017 put India's inequality concern on top of the global debate. Several questions related to the issue became focus of the debate among the experts and policy makers: how inequality hurts, who gets maximum hurt, how to address the problem, etc. Inequality concerns. The latest New World Wealth, a Johannesburg-based company, report says India to be the second most unequal country globally, with millionaires controlling 54% of the nation's wealth. With a total individual wealth of $5,600 billion, it's among the 10 richest countries in the world. Yet, average Indian is relatively poor. If we compare India with Japan, the most equal country in the world, situation looks even worse where millionaires control only 22% of the wealth. We may have a look at the latest data from the Credit Suisse related to India's inequality. The richest 1% own 53% of the country's wealth. The richest 5% own 68.6%, while the top 10% have 76.3%. At the other end of the pyramid, the poorer half competes in just 4.1% of the total wealth of the nation. India's richest 1% owned just 36.8% of the country's wealth in 2000, while the share of the top 10% was 65.9%. Since then, they have steadily increased their share in the country's wealth. The share of the top 1% now exceeds 50%. India's situation looks worse than the United States, where the richest 1% owns 37.3% of total wealth. While India's finest still have a long way to go before they match Russia, where the top 1% owns a stupendous 70.3% of the country's wealth. As per the New India Human Development Survey, IHDS, which provides data on income inequality for the first time, India's score of income equality is lower than Russia, the United States, China and Brazil, is more egalitarian than only South Africa. Inequality needs to be checked. Though inequality is found everywhere, its extremes hurt economies multidimensionally. As per Oxfam, sharp rise in inequality in India and the other countries around the world is damaging, and the governments of the countries need to make efforts to curb it. Rising inequality will have several negative consequences for the nations, slowing down poverty reduction, challenging sustainability of economic growth, compounding the inequalities between men and women, and drive inequalities in health, education, and across the life chances. The World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2016, third time in series, has found severe income disparity to be one of the top global risks in the coming decade. A growing body of evidence has also demonstrated that economic inequality is associated with a range of health and social problems, such as mental illness and violent crimes. This is true across both rich and poor countries. Basically, inequality does not hurt only the poor ones but everyone. Searching for the remedies. But the question is whether inequality is inevitable. The answer is no. It is the result of policy choices. Governments can reverse the situation of increase in inequality by taking some important steps, such as rejecting market fundamentalism, opposing the special interests of powerful elites, and changing the rules and systems that have led to this situation. Governments need to implement reforms that redistribute money and power and level the playing field. There are two main areas where changes to policy could boost economic equality, namely taxation and social spending. 1. Progressive taxation. Progressive taxation method has been proved to be quite effective in this regard. In this method of taxation, corporations and the richest individuals pay more tax on their incomes to the state. The increased incomes from tax on income enables the governments to redistribute resources to the poorer people across the society. Similarly, a better indirect tax regime can enhance government's income in a big way, as is being projected out of the proposed GST of India. The role of taxation in reducing inequality has been documented in OECD and developing countries in a very logical way by now. Thus, a required kind of taxation could play a big role in this direction. As in the latest Oxfam report, early 2017, India performs relatively poorly on tax front. India's total tax collections are at 16.7% of GDP, while its potential is about 53%. Its tax structure is not very progressive since direct taxes account for only a third of total taxes. By comparison, South Africa raises 27.4% of GDP as taxes, 50% of which are direct taxes. Though the government of India has projected the share of direct taxes to improve to around 60% of the total tax collections in the fiscal 2017-18. 2. Social spending. Government's spending on public services can do miracles in reducing inequality. In India, such spending of the governments is termed as the social sector spending, which includes the fund allocations on education, nutrition, food, sanitation, general health care and social protection. Oxfam has provided evidences from more than 150 countries, rich and poor, spanning over 3 decades to show that overall investment in public services and social protection can tackle inequality. The group has for many years campaigned for free, universal public services across countries. As per the latest report of Oxfam, India performs poorly on its social sector spending, center and states put together. India spends about 3% on education and 1.1%, though this data has improved to 1.4% by 2016-17, on healthcare of its GDP, respectively. In comparison, South Africa spends more than twice as much on education, 6.1%, and more than 3 times as much on health, 3.7%. Though South Africa is more unequal than India, the country performs much better in its commitment towards reducing inequality. Conclusion. In recent years, the government of India has become more sensitive to the issue of alarmingly high inequality in the country and looks committed to take suitable steps to check it also. Not only some effective right-based schemes have been launched in recent times, but the government has tried to address the issues related to proper identification of the beneficiaries and delivery also, with the help of Aadhaar, Jan Dhan Yojana and direct benefit transfer. Government is already on the path of reforming the tax regime. The recent move of demonetization of high-value currency notes also falls in this category, while the proposal of the Universal Basic Income, UBI, coming from the Economic Survey 2016-17. looks too innovative, by early March 2017, the government has shown its willingness to go for it also. As ending extreme poverty is among the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, it looks quite timely to move in the direction of checking inequality from rising first and reducing it afterwards. 10. Universal Basic Income. Introduction. In the last few years, we have seen several experts suggesting for a universal basic income, UBI, for India. The idea got strengthened when the Economic Survey 2016-17 proposed for the same, articulating very sound logic in its favor. By March 2017, the government announced that such a scheme may be piloted by late 2017 and implemented to a limited scale by the year 2018-19. Although, before going for such a scheme, the Government of India, GOI, needs to settle several concerns involved with it. An effective idea. We find the idea of UBI gaining ground among several countries across democracies and non-democracies, right from France to Finland to China, where a similar scheme, the DIBAO, is implemented. Such a scheme is generally proposed as a non-targeted one, in which a fixed sum of cash is periodically transferred to all on individual basis. The idea is to ensure that every person in society has the means to live with a certain freedom and dignity, independent of capacity to earn or availability of employment. The idea really looks attractive, as it has potential to reduce both poverty and inequality. India already piloted such a scheme in Madhya Pradesh by 2010. The Economic Survey 2016-17 proposed an amount of 7,620 rupees a year to be transferred into the bank accounts of the beneficiaries of the UBI. Though it is well short of what anyone might need to lead a life of leisure, it would cut absolute poverty from 22% to less than 0.5%. Theoretically, the UBI is proposed to be financed through recycling funds from around 950 welfare schemes, costing around 5% of the GDP, presently run by the GOI, aimed at offering subsidized food, water, fertilizers, and many other things. A big part of government's subsidies is enjoyed by the rich people in the country, as per the Economic Survey 2015-16, which can also be rejigged for this purpose. Working out the scheme. There are several important issues to be settled before India launches such a scheme. A brief survey of the major issues involved with it is given below. Financial model. The first and foremost issue is mobilizing adequate fund for it. If we go into the proposal of the Economic Survey 2016-17, the advice is to recycle the funds of the existing central sector and centrally sponsored schemes run by the GOI. But such schemes cannot be shut down to start UBI. This could be done in phased way only. Till then, the GOI needs to mobilize additional funds for it through budgetary or non-budgetary sources. Given the projection that once the proposed GST is implemented from July 2017, the shortfall in the tax collections is estimated to remain around 66,000 crore rupees due to curtailment of many cesses and surcharges. Budgetary support does not look a very viable option. Though certain other positive measures are also in the pipeline, such as increased tax compliance due to emphasis on less cash, the proposed ceiling on cash transactions, linking Aadhaar to PAN for filing income tax returns and linking Aadhaar to transactions, etc. The implementation of the GST is supposed to increase tax collections, though in medium term, together with checking the evasion of direct and indirect taxes. Selecting the beneficiaries, clues from the name suggested to be applying on all. But as per the survey as well as the GOI expressions, the scheme is proposed to be launched partially. In this case, the target population may be taken from the lower strata of the below poverty line. The Niti Aayog CEO has proposed it for the bottom 20% of the BPL population at the time of its launch. This could be linked to the general policy framework of social justice also. This will not only keep the financial requirements on lower side, but also give some time to the government to recycle the funds from several welfare schemes it either runs or sponsors. A suggestion came from the GOI in favor of transferring the cash into the accounts of women head of the family, which will promote the ideas of inclusive growth and women empowerment also. The amount of transfer, how much money should be transferred, though is guided by the availability of resources, it should look sizable to show an impact on the beneficiaries. As a proposal, the Niti Aayog CEO has proposed a sum of 1,000 rupees on monthly basis, while the survey proposed more. As an example, a sum of 7,620 rupees monthly. Normally, it is believed that without transferring a sizable amount of money, which may bring in comfort to the beneficiaries, the scheme may not remain effective. Though, to begin with, even a lower sum of transfer also looks good. Financial inclusion, inclusion and exclusion, regulation and assessment, etc. are the other involved issues related to it. The scheme looks under examination and study of the GOI in present time. Once it is announced, only then these concerns will settle down. The benefits. The welfare schemes India has been implementing have been faced with certain common problems: misallocations of funds, wastage and seepage, inclusion and exclusion factors, ghost beneficiaries, corruption, the cost of operating them, etc. being the major ones. For this and other reasons, it has been argued to give serious consideration to the idea of the UBI. This will have several merits in it, missing the current redistribution schemes, such as 1. It will be given from above, minimizing several maladies of existing schemes. 2. It is less likely to be prone to exclusion errors. 3. By directly transferring money to bank accounts and bypassing multiple layers of bureaucracy, the scope for out-of-system leakages, in case of the PDS running up to 45%, will be quite lower. Conclusion. The idea of UBI has found support across a broad spectrum of the political ideologies by now. The Ryutu Bandhu, a farm investment support scheme of Telangana government, is considered the first official step in this direction. The recently launched PM Kisan, Prime Minister Kisan Samman Nidhi, is considered an actual farm income support scheme for rural population, especially for farm community. Though not exactly in the category of being universal, they can be rightly taken as quasi-universal basic income or quasi-universal basic rural income, KUBI or KUBRI, as the former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian terms them. Till April 2020, several other states had launched such farm income support schemes, inclusive of the PM Kisan or independent of it. 11. Legitimacy in state and socio-economic transformation. Introduction. Democracies of the world have evolved much since they came into being. India joined the club late, though it is among the most vibrant democratic economies of the world today, with its own set of strengths and weaknesses. Socio-economic transformation of the country could be considered as the most prime aspiration of India. The same resonance we find throughout the period of freedom struggle, in the debates of the Constituent Assembly and the Constitution of India also. Numerous efforts have been made by the governments in this direction, though the performances have not been up to the desired levels. There have been several minor reasons responsible for it. but the major reason has been the lack of financial resources to push it. The revenue that governments get by way of taxes is not a form of income only, but it is a measure of the fiscal potential of the nation, too. India has not been able to tap its actual fiscal potential by now. While its potential of tax collection is estimated to be 23% of the GDP, it collects only about 17%. It means a vast fiscal potential remains untapped. Given the resource crunch faced by the country, it is high time that the country moved in the direction of enhancing the fiscal capacity of the economy. In case of India, income redistribution, the recent proposal being UBI coming from the Economic Survey 2016 to 17, is suggested to be the single most important way out to promote socio-economic transformation today, provided the government can mobilize adequate amount of fund for the process of redistribution. One very weak link to tapping fiscal capacity of the economy has been the lower legitimacy in the state. Global experience. Higher legitimacy in states strengthens democracies in general. In case of tapping the fiscal capacity of the economy, legitimacy in state has been found to be among the most important variables. In this regard, the history of developed countries suggests two important things. 1. The foremost duty of the state is to supply essential services such as physical security, healthcare, education, infrastructure, etc. 2. Redistributive role of the state comes later on. The above described sequencing is not accidental. Unless the middle class in society perceives that it derives some benefits from the government or state, it will be unwilling to support, i.e., finance, the government moves of income redistribution. In other words, we can say that a government needs to earn the legitimacy to redistribute income from the effectiveness of its public service deliveries. If the government tries to redistribute income without guaranteeing effective deliveries of the public services, the middle class starts exiting the state. The famous idea of Albert Hirschman, 1978, the middle class ultimately shies away from financing the schemes of income redistribution. One important sign of exit is fewer number of taxpayers, abundantly evident in case of India. By reducing the pressure on the state, middle class exit will shrivel it, eroding its legitimacy further, leading to more exit in future. A state that is forced into inefficient redistribution risks being trapped in a self-sustaining spiral of inefficient redistribution, reduced legitimacy, reduced resources, poor human capital investments, weak capacity, and so on. The income and consumption anomaly has been specially highlighted by the Union Budget 2017-18, where number of taxpayers are minuscule to ratio of various income groups. Suggestions for today. It is suggested that the government of the country should carry out their functions with utmost commitments to promote legitimacy in the state. Some of the major steps the state can take are as given below. The essential public services promised to the common citizens must reach them in an effective, transparent, and non-partial way on a permanent basis. The visible instances of crony capitalism must be checked, under which many of the times public assets are handed over to a select group of corporate houses, that too at very cheaper prices, by the governments. The issue of governance should not remain on paper only, but it should show up to the citizens that the governments are committed to promote good governance. The manners of corruption must be rooted out with the help of transparency, greater devolution of power, and involving the larger group of the stakeholders. People's participation should be enhanced by the governments in speedy way. Conclusion. In the last few years, We have seen an increased emphasis by the government on the above suggested areas. Promoting the idea of minimum government and maximum governance, the government is not only promoting the governance factor, but it is empowering the common masses too. States have been included in the process of making the Niti Aayog the very vehicle of governance. Governance has been faltering more at the state level. The government is using the different tools of information technology in every possible area to promote transparency, check corruption across the system, and bringing speed in governance. Similarly, focus has shifted towards non-punitive measures of enhancing tax compliance and giving a push towards less cash economy. Auction of public assets has become a fully online process aimed at checking the problem of crony capitalism. Besides, the government is committed to strengthening social trust and cooperation among the citizens and between the government and the masses to promote the level of happiness in citizens' lives. There is a declared shift in favor of modifying people's behavior to achieve the desired objectives of socio-economic transformation in the country, too. Experts believe that the recent policy actions will surely improve the level of legitimacy in the state in the coming times. 12. Farm indebtedness and agri-policy. Introduction. Indebtedness among the farming community has always been a major concern for the government. Once the number of suicides by farmers increased to the alarming levels, indebtedness among the community re-entered into the domain of the public debate. Today, considered as the biggest cause of suicides by farmers, the government policies related to farm sector need re-examination, and the very framework of agri-policy needs restructuring. Farm indebtedness. For farmers, suicides, bankruptcy, and indebtedness have been cited as a major cause. Around 37% of all suicides by the farmers today. Usually, local moneylenders were portrayed as the villain in it. But as per the latest National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB, 2015 data, 80% of the farmers who committed suicides in 2015 due to bankruptcy or debts had borrowed money from institutional sources, banks and registered microfinance institutions. Besides, the country has seen a threefold increase in the farmers' suicide due to bankruptcy and indebtedness, from 1163 of 2014 to 3097 in 2015. In 2015, a total of 8,007 farmers committed suicides due to various reasons. It was for the first time that the NCRB categorized farmers' suicides due to debt or bankruptcy based on the source of loans. Similar findings come from the latest Situation Assessment Survey of Agricultural Households in India report of the NSSO2. Nearly 52% of agricultural households in India are indebted, and levels of debt are as high as 93% in Andhra Pradesh and 89% in Telangana, as per the report. The changed understanding about farm suicides make at least one thing clear, that by allocating more funds to enhance farm loans is not enough. Farm income. The situation of farmers' income remains highly distressed in the country, as per the latest NSSO report cited above. An agricultural household has been defined in by as a household receiving value of produce of more than 3,000 rupees from agriculture, with at least one member self-employed in farming. Interestingly, it shows that for 56% of the marginal land-owning families, with land less than 0.01 hectare, wage and salary employment, not agriculture, was their principal source of income. Another 23% reported livestock as their principal source of income. Average monthly income per agricultural household was estimated at 6,426 rupees, while the net receipt from farm business, cultivation and farming of animals accounted for 60% of the average monthly income per agricultural household. Income from wages and salary accounted for nearly 32% of the average monthly income. About 44% of the estimated agricultural households in the country had an employment guarantee scheme or MGNREGA job card. However, only 38% in the lowest land class, less than 0.01 hectare, had job cards. Further, 12% of all households and 13% marginal land holding households did not have a ration card that entitles them to subsidized food. Institutional and non-institutional loans. There was a perception that except non-farm factors, it was overall agrarian distress that forced farmers to suicides. Even if some suicides were caused by indebtedness, it was due to the high-handedness and exploitative behavior of the local moneylenders on whom farmers largely depend for their loans. The official feeling was that once the spread of institutional lending gets healthier, this problem will be addressed. But the latest data tell a completely different story. Majority of farmers who committed suicides had taken loans from the institutional sources. It may be explained in the following way. Among the institutional sources, the microfinance agencies have spread with much faster pace in recent years, the government giving them liberal spread aimed at promoting financial inclusion in rural areas in general, and farming community in particular. Though microfinance agencies are easily accessible, their interest rates are not less exploitative than the local moneylenders. Besides, the loan recovery method of these agencies lacks a human touch, which is not the case with moneylenders due to their feeling of belongingness to the same society or village. The case of banks is not much better other than some interest subsidies they give. In the event of crop failures or for some other reasons, indebted farmers are available with no alternative of repaying their debt and even sustaining life. In absence of any other financial support system, such farmers are highly prone to committing suicides. Possible remedies. Given the current situation, allocation of higher funds for farm loans does not look serving the purpose. The Union Budget 2020-21 allocating 15 lakh rupees crore for it. Such acts, on one hand, have been increasing the financial burden on the exchequer. On the other hand, they have not been able to protect the farmers from bankruptcy and indebtedness in the real sense either. In the changed scenario, to handle the crisis, the following steps look more suitable, other than enhancing the penetration of formal or institutional lending, which increased fourfold in the last decade. There is a need of putting in place complementary income support system for the farm community. Given the monsoonal and climate-related variability increasing, it looks even more apt. Majority of weak and marginal farmers fail to take benefit from the institutional sources of loans. This should be addressed on priority basis. Minimum support price operations should be able to include all of the weak farmers. To serve the purpose of creating additional sources of income to the farmers, the current scheme of skilling and promoting agro-processing industries at the local level are needed. The scheme of smart cities should be also linked to the farmers. Allied activities to agriculture such as dairy, poultry, fisheries, etc. should be promoted in a targeted way. Awareness regarding farm insurance must be enhanced among the farmers on high priority. The actions of the banks and microfinancing institutions should be monitored from all possible perspectives at the local level. Once the proposed idea of UBI is launched, small and marginal farmers should be necessarily included in the very first go, in case it is not launched universally, as the Government of India has indicated, taking clues from the latest findings of the NSSO reports. In general, the causes of agrarian distress or crisis should be re-examined and addressed with suitable policy actions on priority basis. A more holistic policy framework is need of the hour for the agriculture sector. Conclusion. The latest reports remind us that little has changed for farmers in the past 1 decade, during which farmers' suicides have spread even in the traditional green revolution areas where farmers were believed to be richer and financially more secure. It clearly proves that the agriculture sector, which sustains half of the country, is still out of the real attention of government policy, although in the last 2 years we see an increased focus from the Government of India on the farming sector. 13. Deglobalization, the after effects. Introduction. Countries moved on the path of globalization under a highly legitimate global body, the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 1995. The apprehensions of the developing nations soon diluted as they started reaping economic benefits out of it. Though the course of globalization remained a bit checkered, it has proved to be better for the emerging economies to a large extent, the reason they are still the staunchest supporters of the process. But suddenly the world looks going in the reverse gear, and the process of reverse globalization, deglobalization, looked certain by early 2017. This course will have differentiated effects on the developed and developing economies in short and long term. Meanwhile, the emerging market economies will have to face their own set of challenges due to it. Changing global contours. The seeds of deglobalization process can be found in the global financial crisis of 2007-08 and the failure of the developed economies to recover from it. Recovery from the Great Recession among these economies are getting tough. Even unconventional monetary policies have been tried, pursuing for negative interest rate regime, without much results. In the wake of this, several of these economies have signaled protectionist rhetoric. Right from the Brexit to the rise of protectionist US, in post-Trump period, are the major signals of reversal from the process of globalization. The other reason for reverse globalization is rooted in the aftereffects of the globalization since 1995. The experiences of globalization have not been uniform and singular for the different member nations. Some have reaped high dividends, while some other have gone into huge negative trade with their trading partners. Other than the contentious issues related to agriculture, public stockholding of food, drugs patenting, and climate, in past 1 decade, the world has increasingly debated the negatives of globalization in a very vigorous way, increasing income inequality, adverse impact on environment and climate, etc. being the major ones. Due to this, negative sentiments have been growing among the developed economies towards the process of globalization. Interestingly, these were the apprehensions of the developing countries while the WTO was under the process of negotiation between 1985 to 1994 and even after it. At the G20 summit, Baden-Baden, Germany, mid-March 2017, loud voices against globalization were heard. The US put its concerns regarding its huge trade deficits with key G20 members, such as Germany and China. Though the country denied its desire to get into trade wars, but emphatically called for a fairer trade with it. Not only this, on the margins of the summit, the US clearly expressed its desire towards renegotiating not only with the NAFTA, but the WTO, too. The rise of protectionist US has virtually failed not only the G20 summit it has put the course of globalization in reverse gear. The course of globalization looks completely uncertain. The above given events show as if the world, or at least the economies which matter most, has started to move slowly away from the much celebrated idea of globalization, deglobalization taking over the world, shrinking scope for multilateral trade and economic interdependence. But all does not look lost. The lack of willingness towards globalization among different economies is not of the same degree nor universal to every economy. Better say it looks selective. Impact of regional trade agreements. The much celebrated regional trade agreements look getting irrelevant given the rise of protectionist moves among the nations, particularly among the developed economies. The most ambitious such agreement, Transatlantic Partnership, has been derailed as the biggest force behind it, the USA, has backed out of it. How will it come without US is still not clear, or whether it will die before coming into being is just anybody's guess today. Most of the regional trade agreements, for example, the NAFTA, SAFTA, etc., involving USA and UK are in the process of transition. Meanwhile, the situation regarding such agreements involving the developing nations are different, or better say just opposite. As the course of globalization has been proving socio-economically correct for them to a large extent, they are eager to promote interregional and multilateral trades. In case of India and the BRICS, it is imperative to strengthen the course of globalization. Particularly in case of India, the course of socio-economic transformation depends heavily on the success of globalization. The future of multilateralism. Experts believe that the future course of multilateralism now will depend on the actions and steps of the emerging market economies. Another school of thinking feels history repeating itself. The world looks taking the same old course which caused the demise of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, GATT, by the later part of 1970s. It is still not possible to give the verdict on the fate of globalization, but things look very weak in its favor. India's case. As per the views of the experts and the Economic Survey 2016-17, India necessarily needs a vibrant multilateral trading world to pursue its socio-economic aspirations of alleviating poverty, enhancing growth rate, and joining the club of developed world. For that matter, the country needs to keep pushing in favor of a multilateral world. It needs to negotiate with the countries having higher appetite for globalization on the priority basis, sketching out some more lucrative regional and preferential trade agreements. To scale up its growth to the level of 10%, India needs an active support of exports. If developed nations are apprehensive of trading with China, it does not mean they will have same concerns towards India, too. India might help the developed nations to grow with it. While China is busy rebalancing its economy and trade, finding it difficult, too, India must not miss the opportunity to clear its intentions and prioritize its actions in this regard. India cannot afford, so the emerging market economies, deglobalization. Rather, it should support globalization vigorously. There are high chances of finding viable partners in the developed world itself. Conclusion. Everything is not lost about globalization yet. There is no clarity yet about the benefits which the US or the UK will have out of being protectionist. Maybe after testing the waters of protectionism, they get back to the course of globalization. As the developed nations miscalculated the impact of WTO-promoted globalization, chances are there that they may fail in calculating the positives and negatives of being protectionist, too. It means the verdict on the course of globalization is yet not out. Meanwhile, India is busy pushing in favor of globalization by engaging with more number of countries at higher levels, such as the proposed Quad, popularly called Asian NATO, where India aims to engage with Australia, Japan, and USA, and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Cooperation, RCEP, in the Southeast Asian region. 14. Data as public good. Introduction. Today, it is said that data is new oil. Modern economies are getting increasingly dependent on information technology. One area which got noticed by the experts with a time lag was the reality that uses of IT leaves big data trail of the involved stakeholders. Over the time, the data trail left by the IT sector emerged as a big resource which can be further used as if it is oil in economic governance and development promotion. The issue. Private sector across the world has been using the various data they collect in great many ways to their advantage since data were highlighted by the experts as the new oil. Rather, the government of India has moved slower in this area. It was the Finance Ministry, through its document Economic Survey 2018-19, which sensitized this issue in recent times. Though, it was followed by a debate on the issue of data privacy, which got established as part of privacy, one of the fundamental rights availed by the citizens. The current situation allows the government and private agencies to use public data provided there is no breach of individual privacy and the government has put in place proper safeguard against it. The scenario. Today, governments across the globe deal with a variety of datasets related to their citizens, firms and economic sectors. In India also, the government already holds a rich repository of administrative, survey, institutional and transaction data about citizens, but these datasets are scattered across various ministries. The government can deliver a better experience to citizens by bringing disparate datasets together. For this to be done, the government needs to treat data as public good. Concurrent with the data explosion of recent years, the marginal cost of data has declined exponentially, while its marginal benefit to society has increased manifold. Therefore, society's optimal consumption of data is higher than ever. The global data infrastructure has largely proved reliable, fast, and secure enough to handle this deluge of data. It needs government intervention in creating data as a public good, especially of the poor and in the social sectors of the country, to unlock its benefit for larger betterment of society. This is very important as private sector may not invest in harnessing data where it is not profitable. Utilizing the information embedded in these distinct data sets would benefit the government and country in great many ways such as 1. Enable government to enhance ease of living for citizens. 2. Enable truly evidence-based policy. 3. Improve targeting in welfare schemes. 4. Integrate fragmented market. 5. Bring greater accountability in public services and 6. Generate greater citizen participations in governance. In the endeavor to create data as a public good, it is very important to consider the privacy implications and inherent fairness of data being used. It says that data are generated by the people and should be used for the people. Care must also be taken to not impose the elite's preference of privacy on the poor, who care for a better quality of living the most. To ensure that the socially optimum amount of data is harvested and used, the government needs to step in, either by providing the data itself or correcting the incentive structure faced by the private sector. Sophisticated technologies already exist to protect privacy and share confidential information, governments can create data as a public good within the legal framework of data privacy. The data system involves predominantly data that people share with government bodies with fully informed consent, or the data that is legally sanctioned to be collected by the state for an explicit purpose. Harnessing data consists of 4 steps, each of which offers room for improvement in the country. 1. Gathering. 2. Storing. 3. Processing. And 4. Disseminating. Conclusion. Through Aadhaar, India has been at the forefront of the data and technology revolution that is unfolding. Going forward, the data and information highway must be viewed as equally important infrastructure as the physical highways. Such a stance can help India leapfrog to utilize the benefits of technological advances for the welfare of its people. The document reiterates that in the spirit of the Constitution of India, data of the people, by the people, for the people must therefore become the mantra for the government. 15. The legal logjam. Introduction. The fact that there is huge pendency of cases in front of the Indian legal system is no more a hidden fact. Outlining the piling up of cases in various courts of India, the government has agreed that if legal system of India is not collapsed, it is creating creaking sound. The Economic Survey 1999 to 2000 quoted the annual report of the prestigious Bangalore-based Law Institute. The issue has been discussed deeply by 2 surveys since then, 2017 to 18 and 2018 to 19. The close relationship between economic governance and the rule of law is an established fact world over. The delays in justice doesn't only denies the justice, but it hampers the economy in a great many ways. Issues and remedies. Taking close form the recent analysis by the survey 2018 to 19, the major issues and remedies can be summed up as given below. Given the relationship between economic governance and the rule of law, the contract enforcement remains the single biggest constraint to improve India's ease of doing business ranking. Delays in contract enforcement and disposal resolution are arguably now the single biggest hurdle in this regard. India had 3.5 crore cases pending in the judicial system. Much of the problem is concentrated in the district and subordinate courts, where 87.5% of cases are pending. Therefore, this segment must be the focus of reform, notes the document. This hurdle to economic growth and social well-being can be stabilized through a relatively small investment in the legal system. The profound impact that the government's efforts of introducing the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and the adoption of the GST have had on improving ease of doing business in India, with the country being one of the biggest improvers in advance. Doing Business 2020 report, with its rank jumping to 63 from 142 in the last 5 years. Simulations of efficiency gains and additional judges needed to clear the backlog in 5 years suggest that the numbers are large but achievable. Given the potential economic and social multipliers of a well-functioning legal system, this may well be the best investment India can make. The survey, however, notes that contrary to conventional belief, the problem is not insurmountable. The document suggests that a case clearance rate of 100%, i.e. zero accumulation, can be achieved with the addition of merely 2,279 judges in the lower courts, 93 in high courts, and only 1 in the Supreme Court, which is already within sanctioned strength and only needs filling of vacancies. Further, the document adds that the scenario analysis of efficiency gains needed to clear the backlog in 5 years suggest that the required productivity gains are ambitious but achievable. As per the survey, required productivity gains at full sanctioned strength of judges in lower courts is 24.5%, 4.3% in high courts, and 18% in the Supreme Court. According to the data, the case type analysis reveals that the pendency of cases is highly skewed towards criminal cases in lower courts. Criminal suits contribute 64% of the total pendency as of 31st May 2019, with a clearance rate of 85.3%. The survey believes that a culture of rule of law must pervade as all of the governance and cannot be improved in silos. The document recommends additional judges need to specialize in these case types to speed up the disposal of such cases. The states of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal need special attention, given their lower clearance rates. These states should be given priority in the appointment of additional judges. For enhancing productivity in the judiciary, 3 main suggestions have been given by the document. 1. Increasing the number of working days. 2. Establishment of Indian courts and tribunal services to focus on the administrative aspects of the legal system. 3. Deployment of technology to improve efficiency of the courts, e.g. e-courts mission mode project, and the National Judicial Data Grid being rolled out in phases. Conclusion. Investment in well-functioning legal system should be among the government's priorities, given its potential economic and social multiplier effect. In recent years, we have seen the government taking various steps in this regard, digitizing the court data, online aggregation and disposal of cases, video conferencing, appointments of vacancies in various courts, setting up extra benches of courts, etc. Experts believe that as the government has taken the issue on priority, the performance of the judicial system of the country will improve in coming years. 16. Amalgamation of the public sector banks. Introduction. Under the process of economic reforms, India commenced reforming its banking sector also. As private sector was allowed entry in the industry, in 1994, the existing state-owned banks also headed for reforms. It was necessary to provide level playing field to the upcoming private banks. However, the government was advised, Narsingan Committee I, to privatize the public sector banks, PSBs. We don't find more than slow disinvestment of these banks, with the government continuing to have control on their ownership and management. By the late 2010s, these came under extreme stress of the non-performing assets, NPAs, which was still there by April 2020. We see the government starting the consolidation process. The SBI emerged as the first such bank of the PSBs by 2013 to 2014, which was carried forward by the upcoming new government at the center. Merger of the banks. Even as the financial system is grappling with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the RBI is going ahead with the merger plan of the PSBs coming into effect on 1st April 2020. In 2019 to 20, the government had announced the merger of 10 public sector banks, PSBs. According to this plan, Punjab National Bank, PNB, will absorb Oriental Bank of Commerce and United Bank, which will then become India's second largest bank after State Bank of India, SBI. Similarly, Syndicate Bank will merge with Canara Bank, Union Bank of India will absorb both Andhra Bank and Corporation Bank. Indian Bank and Allahabad Bank will also merge. With this merger, India will have at least 6 big banks. As per the RBI release on 28 March 2020, branches of Allahabad Bank will operate as branches of Indian Bank from 1st April, branches of Andhra Bank and Corporation Bank will operate as branches of Union Bank of India, branches of Oriental Bank of Commerce and United Bank will function as branches of PNB, and those of Syndicate Bank will operate as Canara Bank. Depositors of these banks will be moved to the amalgamated entity. Along with these mergers, the government had also announced a slew of governance reforms. These included appointment of chief risk officers, CROs, with market-linked compensation, which is seen as a big positive for state-run banks. Until now, risk management has not received adequate focus in government banks through specialist officers. The mega merger is a positive step in the path of PSB reforms. PSBs came into existence with the idea of expanding banking services to far-flung areas of the country. But 5 decades after nationalization, it made very little sense to retain too many state-run banks competing in the same segments. These banks continue to exist at the mercy of government's aid. Many of them score relatively less with respect to efficiency when pitted against private and foreign rivals. The Economic Survey 2019-20 has analyzed the hits and misses of the PSBs in a very clear way. Benefits of merger. As per various releases of the government and experts, the merger of the banks will bring in several benefits to them, e.g., rise of bigger banks, ability to finance larger projects on their own remaining within the prudential norms, and cost advantage by way of economies of scale, such as centralized back-office processing, elimination of branch overlap, eliminating redundancies in administration, better manpower planning, optimum fund management, and savings in IT and other fixed costs. The challenges. There is no doubt that the merged banks will be stronger, bigger, and much consolidated in comparison to past. However, a few critical questions remain there. 1. Will the mega mergers will make these banks stronger is a relevant question. Most of these banks have relatively high NPAs. Merging these banks will not make the NPAs disappear, but it will get bigger. The required capital to help them out will be also bigger. 2. How much synergy will it bring? Most of these banks, except the big ones, have strong regional focus and their work culture shaped accordingly. Though, the government has taken care of technology synergy by clubbing banks using the same technology platform, their work culture and regional focus has not been addressed in the same way. 3. Bank like PNB, which has a history of poor governance and risk management, reference can be taken to the Nirav Modi episode, being given the charge of hand-holding to other weak banks will be watched for. 4. Heading the merged entities looks challenging. As in some of the anchor banks, the term of bank chiefs is getting over this year. For a new appointee, as bank chief, handling the tasks related to merger will be a Herculean task. 5. The banks have strong trade unions that command influential positions in the running of these entities and the policy formulation for decades. The government does not look moving ahead by taking these employee unions into confidence, as they have already threatened strike against the merger plan. 6. There is no clue about privatizing these banks, as government has been repeatedly saying to get out the business. The PJ Nayak panel, in 2014, had recommended privatization of the PSBs so that the government will be free of the burden of running these banks. Conclusion. These critical questions need answers from the government. As per the experts, at a time when the economy is reeling under the shock of the novel coronavirus pandemic, implementing these mergers will likely add extra burden on the bank managements. This is a time when banks need to focus on lending activities to productive sectors to revive the economy while ensuring asset quality. This is what 27th March 2020 monetary policy statement of the RBI also signaled. As per some experts, it was wiser if the government had postponed the mega merger for some time.